I'd like to welcome you all to the second part of the CAFÉ lunch. This is the workshop session. How many people attended last night? Do we have a good time? Yes. All right. Okay, so I anticipate we'll have an equally good, if different, time today. I'd like to briefly go through the program and then just discuss a little bit about the CAFÉ's progress. This morning, we're going to have a plenary session with my welcome, moving on to the facilitation introduction. Tom Tomich from UC Davis is going to be giving the keynote address. We'll have a break. We'll go on to a roundtable to stimulate our intellectual juices about challenges for future interdisciplinary research. Have a lunch. During the lunch, there will be a few announcements, culminating with a video to get our intellectual juices even more stimulated. The two breakouts in the afternoon are related. The first one will be for brainstorming to come up with each breakup group coming up with 1 to 3 researchable interdisciplinary challenges that they think UCR could tackle. And the second part of the second breakout then will be for groups to reconvene to start changing those ideas into the structure of grant proposals. How would you, who would you assemble from UCR? Who would your partners be? What funding agencies you'd go to? What methods are available? That sort of thing. So the idea basically is to stimulate some ideas for future interdisciplinary research, which is what CAFÉ is all about. And so, in fact, that is the one-sentence mission of CAFÉ that we put into our proposal. And for those of you who didn't attend yesterday, you should be aware that on Tuesday, the Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development approved CAFÉ as a real university unit. So this means the planning committee is now magically changed into the CAFÉ Executive Committee. So congratulations to the planning committee for their hard work on this. And they should probably convene pretty soon to decide who they want as their director. And also to apply for some money. The other thing that basically I want to say today is just to extend my thanks to the people in the room for their willingness to come and spend a beautiful Saturday. Although, again, it gets us in the mood because you think of this as a kickoff event, and tomorrow is a different kickoff event for many people. So I hope that it turns out to be an enjoyable weekend. The other announcement with regard to the future of CAFÉ, and another thanks, is to the Johnson family who have repurposed their endowed chair in plant sciences to be associated with CAFÉ, and the international search for the real director will include the Johnson chair as one of the perks of being the CAFÉ director. So I saw Sue Johnson's name tag was out there, but I don't see her in the audience right now. But certainly thanks to the Johnson family, thanks to the CNAS and all of the funders here on this list, the major funders who basically made this event happen. And sincere thanks to everybody in the audience. Almost each and every one of you have somehow contributed substantially to the growth of CAFÉ. So moving right along to introducing our facilitator, as another person who directly and indirectly is contributing to the development of CAFÉ, I got to know Richard Conlon through the Grow Riverside activity with the city, and I know that many of you in the audience are aware of Grow Riverside and how Riverside is now making a commitment to the development of local agriculture and local food systems. Richard Conlon is a food policy expert who helped get that similar initiative off the ground in Seattle. He was also a Seattle council person for a long time, so it's nice to have a facilitator who actually has a considerable expertise in the area that we're in. For those of you who are not aware, the next Grow Riverside conference will be a one-day conference in March at UCR. There will be an announcement later on about the need to get our grad students and undergrads aware the posters are going to be are being requested for that, and that at the moment no UCR person has offered a poster yet. But there will be more details at that at lunch. So I'd like to introduce Richard. I think some of you are not aware of how facilitated meetings work, so he's going to give you that instruction. Richard.
Thank you very much, Norm. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it was wonderful to meet so many of you last night at the reception. I think this is going to be a fabulous day, and I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to facilitate today. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the purpose of facilitation and then the purpose of the meeting and what some guidelines are going to be. So in terms of the purpose of facilitation, you can kind of think of me as a concierge for your mind. My job is to help you focus on the task at hand, get the work done, do the things that you want to do, and to provide whatever it is that's going to help that move along in a smooth and orderly fashion. And one of the important things about that is that oftentimes the person who's chairing and running a meeting is somebody who should be a critical participant, and we want Norm to be able to fully participate in all of the activities that are going on. And so the facilitator, my job, is to help take that load off the chair and make sure that everything actually happens in a smooth operation. So the other thing that's really important for me to do is to keep things moving. Timing, we know that you all have given this day for this commitment, and it's extraordinary that you have done that. We want to make sure your time is used wisely and that we also move along in a smooth and orderly fashion. So as things go to the point in the agenda where they need to finish, my job is going to be to remind people that we're getting to that point in the agenda to move people along to the next stage of the agenda process. This is a work session. The goal is to come out with some very serious and significant sets of projects and possible ideas that will take this whole wonderful CAFÉ idea from concept to reality, to facilitate ultimately the creation of scholarly teams to address the problems and the opportunities around food and agriculture. So you're going to be asked to really put a lot of energy into this today. And again, we know that's asking a lot of you, but it's really important that this actually gets done. If you have anything that you need, don't hesitate to contact me or tell me if there's something that's not working for you, and we'll do our best to use some adaptive management to actually make sure that things do work successfully. One thing that I want to emphasize is that since the main purpose of the afternoon session is going to be to come up with these ideas for projects and ways in which the CAFÉ concept can actually be implemented, as you're listening to the speaker and the panelists this morning, think about what it is that you might imagine CAFÉ taking off with as a project, as a potentially fundable and doable project that CAFÉ could actually make an important interdisciplinary contribution to. And jot down ideas. Because when you get to the work sessions this afternoon, you're going to be asked to generate a set of ideas and then ultimately to hone in on a very small set of specific ideas that will actually help make this a reality. So keep that in mind as you're listening to people. Keep it in mind as you think about how you're going to participate in the afternoon sessions, and jot down those ideas and be ready to jump in as soon as we get into the actual workshop sessions this afternoon. The sessions are scheduled for about 50 minutes. That sounds like a lot of time, but you'd be surprised at how fast that goes when 8 or 10 people are working together to try and come up with these kinds of ideas and to hone in on them. So be ready to jump in, and of course the hidden agenda on that is that if you've got an idea that's a favorite of yours that you want to make sure happens, if you're the first one to jump in and get that on the agenda, you've got a really good chance of getting people to look at that seriously and consider it as a possible idea. Some guidelines for how we want the session to operate. One is I'm going to do the thing they do in movies and say, please make sure that your cell phones are either off or silenced. That is, I always think this is kind of a silly announcement to make because everybody knows this by now, but I was in a performance once recently, and they said, yes, and actually somebody's cell phone went off in the middle of the acting, and not only did it go off, but the person was too embarrassed to answer it. So we could all hear the phone ringing and then somebody leaving a message on the phone. So anyway, it's just a nice thing to do. Please be respectful of each other, particularly when we get into the group sessions. There's going to be a lot of popcorn and a lot of people interacting and talking to each other. I'm sure this audience is going to find that pretty easy to do, but just be respectful of each other and make sure that you think about everybody participating and being involved in things. Again, I mentioned the time. You will be surprised at how fast some of these sessions actually wind up going. I will facilitate that and try and make sure that everybody stays on time. Important logistics. Guys, you've seen the coffee and food is in the back. Bathrooms are a little bit longer to travel to than Optimum, but you go down the hall, you'll find a cafe on your right. If you turn left at that corridor, the bathrooms are right back there. And finally, I want to mention the lunch session. Lunch is going to be an opportunity for doing some networking, but we, again, don't have a huge amount of time for lunch, and there are going to be some pretty important announcements and things happening during lunch. So we're going to encourage people to get their lunch fairly quickly and then kind of stay in the room if possible as you're going through that, so that we can make sure that the announcements and other things are seen by everybody. So I think that's all that I have. Any questions or anything that anybody wants to ask about the agenda or the facilitation? Okay, Norm.
It's probably not going to happen, but one of the things I understand with facilitated meetings is that sometimes the membership of the meeting can contribute to tweaking the process a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so feedback from the membership for tweaking the process is open for those who feel that they want to explore something slightly different.
Absolutely. Thanks for reminding me of that. And one thing that we do want to say is that when we get to the workshop process, this is going to be a dynamic process. And so the first workshop we've pretty much designed as to what we want to have happen, but we may change what's in the program for the second workshop, depending on how the first session actually goes. So thanks for that reminder. Anything else? Yes. That I don't know. Go ahead. The question is if there's any way in which the notes from the presenter and things like that are going to be compiled. Is that what you're asking for? Uh-huh. We should say that we are being videoed, so there will be a video of the entire thing. And then in the work sessions, there will be flip charts at which everything is going to be recorded. And so there will be that opportunity to have it. I don't know if there's other kinds of formalities. Yeah. Norm?
I know that the videotape part is being videotaped by the University of California Global Food Initiative, President's Initiative, so that will be available through that, and we will try to post everything else that we have on the CAFÉ website. Okay, so, and for those who don't know, that's cafe.ucr.edu, and it is not a split and fancy website at the moment, so don't expect bells and whistles. This is a work in progress.
Right. Some of the bells and whistles will be generated today. Yes. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Norm to introduce the keynote.
Thank you, Richard. As I said, it appears to me as I look out over the room that generally everybody in the room has contributed to the conception, development, and birth of CAFÉ. Tom Tomich is no exception to that. I'm one of the university's representatives for the University of California Global Food Initiative. As I referred to before, this is Janet Napolitano's initiative, and I was fortunate to attend some of the meetings in Oakland, and at one of those meetings, I was telling people about CAFÉ and where we were going, and everybody said, "You got to go meet Tom Tomich." And so I went over and said hi, and I asked if I could come visit on one of my future trips to Davis, and he was gracious enough to invite me up. So during one of those trips, we had a fabulous hour-long discussion, and Tom basically told me to go ahead and do what I wanted to do with regard, to reach for the dream that I was developing, which in many ways seems sort of crazy. Bring together a vast array of interdisciplinary people who all share the interest in broad sense agriculture in one way or another, but often have these strong academic barriers between them where communication is very difficult. And on large campuses, physical distance is difficult. Now, fortunately, UCR is at this nexus where we're evolving from a small campus to a large campus. So this is the perfect time, before we get too big, to make these kind of connections. And so I was sort of laying this out for Tom and saying, this all seems crazy, and people say, can you really do it? And who are these other people? And we're all specialists. Can we communicate? And Tom gave me permission to go ahead. And basically, I've already told my son before that I believe that the scholars of the 20th century were people who were reductionist specialists, and the scholars of the 21st century are going to be people who are generalized specialists, people who can be a good, strong generalist who can reach out and communicate and build teams, at the same time being comfortable in their shoes within their expertise. And until I met Tom, I didn't think such people existed. But you can read about his accomplishments on the one-pager you have. I have a copy of his CV here, but it's so heavy that I'm not going to be able to, I can barely lift it rather than go through it. So rather than spend any more time, I'd just like to say that Tom is in many ways the best person for addressing us on what we can anticipate in terms of lessons learned on an interdisciplinary center. His Agricultural Sustainability Institute has a lot of the earmarks that CAFÉ should strive for, that if we're going to develop, we can look to the ASI as the sort of unit that can set up some of our goals, that CAFÉ will not be the same as the ASI, but it has a lot of the elements that give us permission to be who we really want to be. And with that, I'd like to introduce Tom Tomich, Executive Director of the ASI.
Well, I always enjoy coming to Riverside, especially this time of year. This is a beautiful time of year. Good morning, everybody. People look wide awake. There were some people up pretty late last night at Mission Inn, but I'm glad you all made it here. Norm, thank you so much. That's one of the warmest introductions I've ever received, and you know all the buttons to push that make me feel good about being here. Thank you. It is true. Norm and I are both crazy. And it was really quite a wonderful thing to have Norm reach out to us. When he visited Davis, the skyrockets exploded, the violin started playing. I could tell that there was a kindred spirit who also was actually in a position to step up and use the incredible privilege that we have as faculty members of the University of California to do some things that are maybe a bit unusual and that also are very much coupled to our mission as the public university for the people of California. So, congratulations on this start. Congratulations on the approval of the Vice Chancellor. You may already be more official than ASI is 9 years in, I think. But I guess one of the things I said to Norm is in these kinds of enterprises, some people get it right away. Some people need to have evidence of proof of concept. So it is really important to go forward and do tangible stuff along the lines of these principles so that colleagues in the academy, but also the public, can say, oh, this is what these crazy guys, Norm and Tom, are talking about. So what I wanted to do today was to talk mostly about how we've approached the creation of the Agricultural Sustainability Institute. So I'm going to be emphasizing more the process side, but I will give you some kind of tangible nuggets. And are we about ready to go? Yeah, this guy's fantastic. You always need, if you're giving a talk, you always need somebody like this who worries about all the panicky stuff. But I wanted to emphasize mainly the process-based part. And Norm, I apologize. I took a little liberty and I switched the title of the talk. And I did that because I wanted to talk about this, but I also thought it was the thing to talk about. These kinds of jobs, there's two lines of integration that people like Norm and I have to worry about. One is the plain, which is interdisciplinary integration. So across major disciplines, not just kindred disciplines, but massively open integration across disciplines. And last night, today, I see the evidence that you're doing that at Riverside already. You need to keep doing that. But the other dimension of integration that is super important is the dimension of integration between the university and society. So I'm going to actually be emphasizing a bit more of that second, but you've got to worry about both of them, okay? They've got to proceed in parallel. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. And I want to add just one thing to the introduction that Norm gave, which is I worked outside California for most of my career, but I did grow up on a farm in California that's been here since 1897 in the Sacramento Valley. And that kind of connectivity to the grassroots, and that I come from the valley culture, and that's a tremendous advantage for me. It doesn't always show. I reveal that sometimes, but not always. I also want to say I have multiple roles. I'm the director of the Agricultural Sustainability Institute. I'm also the director of our statewide Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education program. So Glenda is also one of my two bosses, in addition to the dean. And you give me a lot of freedom to act. I really appreciate that. I think I'm the first director of SARUP in its 30-plus years of history who's had the level of support from UC leadership that I've got. And in the past, I have to say, my predecessors didn't have that. And that level of interest and support is extremely important. It's great to see Glenda here today supporting the launch of CAFÉ. I also have the Kellogg Endowed Chair in Sustainable Food Systems. So I'm so happy to hear, Norm, that with your initiative, you've lined up this chair from the Johnston family, because that gives me the credibility as a faculty member and as an endowed chairholder that within the academy, I can deal with people as peers, and they treat me as a peer. And that's a tremendous advantage in this kind of intellectual entrepreneurship and leadership kind of role. And then finally, I actually am a faculty member. And we have these different organizational models. Sometimes at Davis, centers and institutes are led by what are called executive directors. They're non-faculty, they're more administrative. I cling to the conceit that I'm not an administrator, that I'm a researcher. It depends which day, how realistic that conceit is. But I do think that for this kind of intellectual heavy lifting, you really want to have an intellectual leader. And sure, management is important, but it's the ability to really kind of fearlessly cross boundaries that's crucial for this. So, basically 3 parts of the talk. One of the things so when Berkeley created its Berkeley Food Institute, people said, oh, Tom, aren't you worried about this? Berkeley's got this thing. It sounds like ASI. And I said, well, absolutely not. In fact, I was really pushing them to do this because each of our institutions is so diverse, so unique, and so complicated that having having, I don't know if you'd call it a chelating agent or some kind of a strong attractor, so that, and you'll see in a moment that I think of these as networks. So having a network node here at Riverside is the way that we're all going to work together more efficiently. So having said that, all of our campuses are so unique, so different. I think at some point we should sit down and do the accounting of the strengths of all, because I think that the complementarity is so much more the story than the, people say, oh, duplication of effort. My gosh, the task is so big and our endowments of assets are so different that I view this network approach as the way we get those pieces lined up and actually operating together. I'm going to talk a bit in a more kind of abstract or conceptual framework way about how I think about this idea of linking knowledge with action or linking science with society. The heart of our mission of the University of California, but also in what I do in food and agriculture. And I think of what CAFÉ does, what ASI does, as the food and agriculture lens on what's a broader field called sustainability science. And that field is characterized by being use-driven, being engaged with stakeholders. We were having a conversation at the Mission Inn, some of us last night, about we're so imbued with this distinction between basic and applied, which I think for many of these things completely misleads us. And I feel that the cutting edge of the work that we're doing in food and agriculture is the application leads to the basic insights, which then advance the whole field. And particularly for integration across disciplines, place and problem are the two big integrators. I mean, that's not just from ASI. Those are lessons that come from things I've been doing my whole career. So place, we've got California. Problem or opportunity, we got plenty. So it's more about thinking about strategically what's the big picture and where are you going to start. And I think that's what you're going to be doing this afternoon. And then just a very short, just a couple slides about a specific example. Ariel kindly hosted me 2 years ago? Something like that, 3 years ago, to talk about this nitrogen assessment that we did for California, partly because nitrogen is really important, but also as a prototype for how to do this kind of integrated work. 7 years on, we just finished the book. It's coming out from UC Press in the spring, but just a couple of the process insights, and I'll be happy to come back to talk about the substance of that. So those are kind of the three parts. The point about ASI, it's a hub, okay? Some people talk about backbone institutions. We maintain particular kinds of functions that support interdisciplinary integration and linking science with society. So those are functions like communication, budget and finance, proposal coordination, governance and accountability. I'll come back to that. But the sorts of things that faculty members shouldn't have to do within their own labs or departments are not going to do. I think of our role as an institute as doing two things. On the benefit side, it will be fun, it will be exciting, providing opportunities that for research, education, and outreach sorts of activity that people aren't going to do in their individual labs. And I'm not thinking people stop doing everything. I'm thinking people opt in. So it's got to be as sweet as possible for people to decide to make that positive step to opt in. But then there's the cost side. And think of it in terms of activation energy, right? If you're going to be doing a proposal for NSF within your own discipline for your own lab, as opposed to doing a proposal that involves 20 people, which is going to be easier? I mean, you know the program officers in your discipline, you know. We consciously put in place the functions, both through our SARP but also through our ASI functions, to be able to underwrite and reduce those costs. So we attract people with exciting and we keep the cost down. So it's all about getting people to opt in. So I did promise a few tangible examples, and I'm going to discipline myself to work through these one by one, so you have some idea of the what we do. And Glenda, I apologize. You've heard these stories so many times. I think other people have here too. Okay, well, thank you. And this is kind of the ASI story. So some of you will have heard these things before, but it's actually kind of fun for me to put it all together in this way. But one of the things we do is you'll see a couple slides about our century experiment at the Russell Ranch Sustainable Agriculture Facility. We do a field day every May, and we'd love to have a group from Riverside come. This is where I go into my game show host mode, right? I mean, the Russell Ranch Sustainable Agriculture Facility is to agroecology and sustainable agriculture what the Large Hadron Collider is to particle physics, right? So that's where we do the fundamental process-based research. It's a 100-year commitment. It's a data generator. So we were talking about tomatoes. We've got data on tomatoes, wheat, key commodities. And it's also a test bed for sensors. And this is where I really brag. We're growing stuff for NASA out there. So Ames and JPL are installing instruments on that place for the next generation of remote sensing, for the Earth observation function of NASA. So that's about water, energy, soil, how those relate to the labor force, how those relate to human nutrition. And nobody else has one of these. And it's not just ours, right? It's for you, too. It's for the state of California. We also have a big social justice and racial equity component to our work, particularly around farm workers, where, I'm going to say this even though we're taping this, the University of California has a mixed record in terms of its attention to issues around farm workers. In fact, SERP exists because of a much misunderstood dispute about the role of science and employment in California agriculture. But increasingly, it's not just farm workers, but it's workers across the food system. And Southern California is actually one of the centers for the food system workers movement. You have some amazing leaders right here in this region, in that area. We also, part of the nitrogen assessment, we've created a new solution center for nutrient management, so we talk a lot about carbon, justifiably, but nitrogen, my soil science friends said that nitrogen was the first carbon rather than, I was saying, is nitrogen the next carbon? And they said, no, we've been worried about nitrogen longer than we've been worried about carbon. But to think, there are these occasional win-win opportunities, whereas there's a chance to save farmers money and do things that are good for the environment and do good things for human health. When you fall over one of those, you've got to do something about it, because those win-wins are really precious. So that's our effort to do something about that. We also, through SERP, and many of these are actually implemented through our statewide program. So you can be connected. You're part of UCA&R statewide programs. Is our work with smaller scale ethnic minority farmers, linking them with marketing opportunities. Moving back, though, to the Davis campus activities, our educational programs, apart from outreach, are all through the UC Davis campus. Was it 4 or 5 years ago, we launched a new Bachelor of Science in Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems. This is to add to the long list of things in which the director of ASI has been wrong. When I took the job, I thought, oh my gosh, a new bachelor's degree, it's going to be heavy lifting. It was, but what's the payoff for me in this? I was so wrong about that. One of the key insights from our work is a key leverage point for something like CAFÉ or ASI for legitimacy on a university campus, and also a key kind of a focal point for faculty collaboration is actually undergraduate education. I did not perceive that, but lo and behold, the University of California still does care about undergraduate education. And it gives us legitimacy on our campus that nobody can question why we're there, because we're supporting this Bachelor of Science. I don't say this to you lightly, because it's difficult to get a new degree, but there are other ways you can approach it. I mean, minors and things. But what I would say is, and I would hope that you would consider this afternoon, some kind of initiatives in undergraduate or graduate education as part of the kind of the founding set of possibilities for CAFÉ. Something I almost missed. And then finally, so I've talked about the social justice part, but one of our 4 key values for ASI is being inclusive. So that means we have no political litmus test as long as you're willing to accept evidence and respect other people. I think Richard, you mentioned respect. Respect is a key word in these things. As long as you're willing to do that, those are the 2 tickets to admission. There's no test about politics. There's no test about ideology. Basically, the way it's set up with our board is that anybody who wants to advance sustainability in the food system should feel welcome at ASI. This is different. I mean, we don't judge people and say, Norm, you're sustainable. Richard, you're not sustainable. You're good, you're bad. Let's be honest, nothing is sustainable. Nothing. Okay, well, we got the first law of thermodynamics, or is it the second law? Thermodynamics. Anyway, in the long run, nothing is sustainable. But what we got to get onto is sustainability at a human time scale. And we're not there yet. So let's not be holier than thou. Let's be inclusive. So in addition to farm workers, food system workers, we also work with huge companies, names that you would recognize. And they have their own set of levers that they operate if you really want to change the whole system. And that's our vision is, we're not about the 5% at the margins. I'm interested in the 95% that has the huge social footprint, that has the huge environmental footprint. I want to be connected with that. Okay? And that's what California needs to do, but that's also the leverage point for California for the whole planet. So when I came back from international work to take this job, and I think I told Norm this story, when I left international agricultural research, colleagues from Brazil and Thailand said, well, we understand why you're going back because that's where you're from and that's where the family farm is. But we want to stay in touch because we look to California for inspiration. They didn't say the United States. They didn't say Iowa. They said California. Okay? So I think that's a really important thing. One thing I would suggest is, I've learned the hard way, creating new stuff in institutions like universities is exhausting. So I would urge you maybe to start with an inventory of the institutional assets you've got. And maybe you've already done this. It turns out that when I was hired, I showed up for the easy part. A lot of the heavy lifting had been done, and it had been done decades ago. I mean, we had a student farm that was founded in 1977. The Russell Ranch facility came out of 2 much earlier USDA-funded projects. SAREP, 1986. So we've got education, research, extension. We have done some new things. We are now home to the National Network on Food, Agriculture, and Sustainability, which I'll say a bit more about. This new undergraduate major, which we started in 2011. One of the things I spent a lot of time getting started with is the advisory board for ASI. And people here may know Rich Rominger. He's one of the leaders in the ag sector, universally respected, a farmer in Yolo County who was also Deputy Secretary of Agriculture for the U.S. and CDFA Secretary. And Rich told me, he said, designing this advisory board, Tom, it's not about making your life easy. It's actually about complicating your life. So Norm, whoever's the director of CAFÉ, needs to embrace that kind of advisory board role, I think. So you don't want to have people who will just agree to everything. In fact, you want to have people who will respectfully disagree and mix things up. We have also been building on existing graduate programs rather than trying to start everything from scratch. We just got the endowment for the 4th endowed chair that's associated with ASI, one in agroecology that will live in our plant sciences department. I told you about the opting in about faculty. We did have the benefit of a cluster hire of 8 UC Davis FTE and 1 FTE that came from UCOP. So that core of 9, including me, was sort of the beginning. But every year we identify new folks, we're now up to 22, who are faculty who contribute to our research, education, and extension missions. And every year I contact them and I say, I'd like you to join us as a fellow. And the deal is, please just keep doing exactly what you're doing. They kind of like that, right? They get to come to parties. But it's recognition of this kind of crazy behavior that Norm and I were referring to. That doesn't mean that that's the total. But I'm proud to say that this year we've moved off the Davis campus in terms of faculty affiliates. And your very own Ken Barenclough is the first non-UC Davis faculty affiliate of ASI because of his service to the nitrogen assessment, both by writing a brilliant policy chapter, but also his contribution to the challenging task of talking with sometimes very agitated people who are threatened by conversations about nitrogen in a very science-based, clear way that people feel like they don't need to be threatened, that there's actually, that science can inform policy. Imagine that. I know he knows this, but sometimes people think of them as different worlds. So part of the integration is about linking those. But then also this thinking about the network. So it's not just on campus, it's really statewide. And Glenda and I and Bill Frost, this whole question of what statewide-ness means in an era of both expanding communication opportunities, but quite frankly, scarce financial resources, and even more scarce human resources, something that we need to have a lot of strategic thinking about. I mentioned INFAST, the national network. So Kellogg Foundation endowed the chair that I have the honor to hold, but they subsequently gave us an endowment gift to basically create the network of endowed chairs that they had been funding across the United States. So we have the honor of hosting at ASI the national network of those Kellogg endowed chairs and other endowed chairs across the country. And the purposes are about increasing food system resilience and figuring out what that actually means operationally, bringing critical scholarship, interdisciplinary scholarship to discussion, particularly about science and the public interest in food and agriculture. And so the folks who are participating in this network are all at least as busy as I am. So the dilemma is, how are you going to propose something that is so exciting that they're going to say no to something in their home state, Ohio, North Carolina, Iowa, and actually put time into a national effort to do something? And when we started out, we didn't know what that thing was, and it's emerged that thing is inequity and vulnerability in the food system. And if you think about it, I guess it's not surprising that that was the thing that came out. I mean, certainly food and agriculture are not the only lenses for viewing inequity, racial discrimination, vulnerability. But my gosh, when you frame it in that way, think about slavery. Think about farm labor in the United States. Think about fast food in the terms of employment of workers in the food sector now. Think about, and this is something that California excels in, I mean, we are the proof of the paradox of hunger among abundance. If anybody says to you the solution to the global problem of hunger is solely on the supply side, come with me to Fresno. Okay? Most productive county in the United States for agriculture, the value every year that Fresno produces in farm products is greater than agricultural production in other countries, bigger than Great Britain. Also a hotspot of food insecurity of national significance. Okay? So when you start looking at it that way, it starts to get kind of exciting. So these are the 25 institutions. You'll recognize many of them. Many of them are land-grant universities. I spoke with our national coordinator just before I got on the plane to come down here. We would love it when CAFÉ is ready. We would love to invite CAFÉ to be part of this group too. So back to ASI. I use the words food system and sustainability a lot. I think we probably have a shared understanding of what those are, but just to make sure. I'm lousy at definitions. I have to discipline myself to make sure I do this. So we use the OECD definition that's 30 years old or more, but it emphasizes, so a set of activities. So we think about food, growing food, processing food, marketing food, so sets of activities. But it's interesting, they also said a set of relationships and interactions. So even then, it was opening up this idea that we're not just thinking about discrete economic or social activities, but we're thinking about networks of human relationships that we need to be paying attention to understand the system. So there's room for engineers, there's room for social scientists, there's room for plant scientists, there's room for economists, okay? And everybody else. And so then the sustainability thing. We use the Brundtland definition, which you're probably familiar with. The key thing about it is the intergenerational, right? So for me, sustainability in food and agriculture is, I'm unapologetic about it being anthropocentric. It only makes sense if we think about it not in geologic timescales, but in scales of human generations. That's how we think about it. Okay? And I should say, if anybody has questions or objections or comments, interrupt me. Okay? And you're watching the clock for me, Richard? Thank you. That makes me feel very cared for. I appreciate that. So the thing about that Brundtland report, though, is if you look at that definition and you're trying to meet a payroll in the private sector, or you're trying to run a lab, or you're trying to design an education, it gives no operational guidance about how to get to sustainability. So one of the places we started was by saying, well, what's our vision for a sustainable food system? And so these are some of the attributes that we try to simultaneously carry in mind. I always start with the statement about profitable, because people think sometimes that sustainability is this agenda which is about regulating. If we kill off private enterprise, I mean, actually that experiment has been run. It's called the Soviet Union. It didn't work for agriculture. So let's not repeat it. Okay? But innovative and adaptive. The other thing where we get typecast is, oh, you want to take us back to the 17th century. No. So please don't. That's why I also brag about the NASA stuff and things like that. This isn't about going back to moldboard plows and oxen. Okay? We've got to be careful in our messaging, though, not to succumb. It's very tempting to portray things in this kind of warm and fuzzy, romantic past, especially for University of California. Let's be forward-looking. Food. So start with profits. I always mention food early on. 96% of the population of California doesn't know where food comes from, or doesn't know anything about agriculture, but they know food. Everybody can relate to food. We all relate to it, fortunately, almost all of us, multiple times a day. We have an abundance of food. If you get people engaged on food system sustainability, they get to agriculture real fast. Okay. Prosperity and equity. These are not just buzzwords. I mean, these are still aspirations, even for a place as rich as California. Environment, human health, of course. These might be a bit more surprising. Awareness and understanding of the food system and public participation in policy regarding the food system. Those are there because of my fundamental belief, shared by my colleagues, that unless we have an informed citizenry who gets connected on these things, we're not going to get the food system we want. Because it's not just about our individual decisions about what we grow and what we eat. It's also about how we vote, what are the policies we put in place. The heavy lifting is really on that collective action side. And that's where I think the United States has really lost ground in our ability to have an intelligent conversation about public policy. But if we're going to get to where we need to be, we've got to bring that back. And CAFÉ, ASI, University of California, if we can't address these things, who's going to do it? The other thing about those golden words is, and we haven't done this yet, but all of them in principle can be monitored and measured, right? So we could benchmark all of these things to know where we're going. In fact, we have a big project, which I won't talk about today, which is we call food system informatics. And that's the mashup of Silicon Valley and Central Valley. And that's how to bring the flood of data that's coming from, say, those kinds of satellites that NASA's developing, and all kinds of data to better inform decisions about human health, human nutrition, food, the environment, justice. The pace of change in information technology is so fast. And those big food companies I was mentioning are realizing that their business models that have been profitable but very low margin, cutthroat, competitive models for centuries, those models are based on scarcity of information and arbitrage, spatial and temporal arbitrage opportunities. If you're in a world that's flooded with information, keeping those secrets as the key to your business model, good luck with that. So there's a very interesting kind of dialogue. It's not very public yet, but it's about what is the workable business model for the future in the food sector. Does it look like Campbell's Soup, was a company that we work with? Or does it look more like Google? Does it look like a combination with some of Bank of America and Wells Fargo and Rabobank thrown in? So this whole configuration of information, science, food, agriculture, resources. Stay tuned. I think a generation from now, we'll see a very different sector. So, our mission starts with healthy food and access to healthy food, but then we get you to agriculture and the vitality of agriculture going forward. I want to emphasize, it's not about putting agriculture out of business, right? What makes California a nice place to be? All the food we ate this morning, we have this wonderful abundance. We don't want to lose that. We can't take it for granted. I mean, this drought shows we can't take it for granted. And for us, which I think I hear CAFÉ saying too, there is this part about integrating across research, education, and extension, integrating across disciplines, linking. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. How many of you seen Stokes' book, Pasture's Quadrant? Surprisingly few people. It's a little book. It's still in print. This is about the basic applied false dichotomy. 2x2, I love 2x2 matrices, right? I can always remember. So, and you've got one degenerate quadrant, so you only got 3 boxes you got to worry about. So, yes, no questions. Research inspired by, is it useful on one dimension? And the other dimension is advancing knowledge. So the curiosity-based, application-based. So, this is the stereotype, right? Pure basic research, fiat lux, that's our motto. If we didn't have this, we couldn't do the other stuff. I'm not saying these boxes should be depopulated, but I'm saying we too often ignore the box where the answer is yes to both. So, yes, the bulk of our work is going to continue to be inspired by advancing fundamental understanding. And yes, many of our graduates are going to go not into a pure research setting, they're going to go into industry. So this is important too. But these precious places like CAFÉ are the places where these two things happen, the use-inspired basic research. Why is that precious? This is a publication, and Norm, you've got a copy of this. This is Clark, Tomich, and others, the PNAS one on the boundary spanning. You got to know where you are, and a friend of ours calls this the periodic table of sustainability science. But this goes from 2x2 to 2x3. So you've got single discipline, multidiscipline, and then you've got basically what's the knowledge going to be used for. So enlightenment, fiat lux, that's the quest for knowledge for its own sake, which is precious, and that's kind of the cartoon we tend to carry in our minds. It's important. The key attribute there is scientific credibility. Okay? That's most of our activity. Then there is the next one, which is we want our research, this new knowledge, to support better decisions. Okay? Decision support. So it's about linking either a single discipline with a single user of information or multiple disciplines with a single user of information. So no politics here. It's just, well, it could be authoritarian politics. Don't get me started on that. But it's basically just supporting decision-making by one person. A farmer, for example, a lot of variety trials, fertilizer trials, things like that, are decision support. Okay. Now, for that, usefulness, that's what the land-grant system was set up for. We've all been doing this for more than 150 years. Maybe we've lost a little ground on it, but thanks to leadership from Glenda and other people, I mean, that's still... we know the warts and weaknesses. Other places envy what we've got in terms of that connection. Okay, so credibility, usefulness. What we added in this was this negotiation support category. Think about climate change. Think about water in California. Think about childhood obesity. Okay. Most of the stuff, I bet, it'll be interesting to do this accounting. I bet most of the stuff that comes up this afternoon is going to be here. Okay? It's going to be multiple disciplines, and it's going to be multiple stakeholders. How many of you know what a wicked problem is? Wicked problem? What's a wicked problem? Okay. You don't have to be... I was going to call on you anyway, Rachel. No? A wicked problem is a problem that, by its nature, the people who have a stake in it can't even agree on what the problem is. Okay? So a lot of the stuff, our niche, is wicked problems. So to do effective linking of science with action, for those kinds of things, you need to have credibility, you need to have the connections for usefulness, and there's this additional part which is legitimacy. That's the broader view of society about the process that even identifies what the problem is. Okay. I'm going to talk, this is pretty abstract stuff. I'm going to illustrate this a bit with our experience. We actually designed our operational principles for the Institute around these three things. So credibility. Don't compromise on scientific quality. In fact, for this kind of stuff, you're going to be held to a higher standard by your colleagues. And if you screw it up, it's done. I lose sleep over this, but our credibility is extremely important in this area, particularly so because there's been a lot of shoddy interdisciplinary work done. Okay? So don't do that. That's a dead end. Usefulness, politics, sometimes they say saliency. This is about making sure farmers, ranchers, school districts in California, that we're in touch with them and we know what their problems and opportunities are, so the people who use science, that we're actually doing the science that gives them answers they can use. Okay? But this legitimacy part is the part that I actually spend much of my time as director thinking about. That's why we have the advisory board we have. That's why if you look at our website, you will see everybody who's made any donation or funded anything above about $100 to my institute, because we all know Glenda would love to have more money to do all this stuff. The big growth is not going to come in state funding. We're going to have to be dealing with the private sector. We're going to have to be dealing with foundations. We're going to have to be dealing with philanthropists who have good intentions and their own agendas. So we've got to be ready to be able to keep focused on science and the public interest and not lose that. So this legitimacy is about governance. It's about how we set priorities. It's about what questions we ask. So your afternoon activity, What are the questions you're going to be asked? So, good news. We know a lot more about doing this stuff now than we did 15, 20 years ago. Think about it. Think of the IPCC. If we didn't have that innovation, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we could be sitting here and think, gee, the weather's unusual. Yeah, I mean, we've always said that, right? The ability to actually monitor and scope these things out at that level, we've learned a lot of lessons. And what we actively do is downscale those kind of assessment protocols to California. They work a lot better in California than they do for the whole planet, by the way. So that gives us an advantage. But place-based. So we got California, got north, we got south. The linking science, community policy, and private enterprise. Actually, coming back to California, I hadn't been paying enough attention to the private enterprise links. The use-driven, problem-inspired, keeping the empirical part being evidence-based so that you actually sometimes refute a hypothesis, please. Multiple scales. This is actually, for me, one of the most attractive things, but going from the molecular to the solar system and beyond. The collaborative and multidisciplinary I've been talking about. But this is not us. This is actually a group at Harvard that studies how you do this stuff. And these are their conclusions. By the way, which branch of the U.S. government do you think is most effective at interdisciplinary efforts to link science with impact? Anybody? It's Department of Defense. Now, their impact is killing people, or actually, no, you know, when they say it, no, their motivation is not getting killed. They're really serious about innovation and solving problems. So some of this insight actually comes from things like DARPA. We got to be more DARPA-oriented. No, we've got to shed some of our mythology. This is a picture from Animal Science at Davis from, I don't know, 1920s or 30s. It's kind of our romantic notion about, I'm a faculty member. We have something in the cattle pens. I hear what you say. I go back to the lab. I solve your problem, and I tell you, and it's this linear thing. Well, at Santa Cruz, Keith Warner did his dissertation in a book called Agroecology in Action. And so he actually had SARIP and other programs as the subject of his dissertation research. He didn't get linear things at all. What he got were networks. Now, my communication staff beautified this, which I can use all the beautification I can get, but this one slide is supposed to be simple and just like back of the envelope. But thanks to work that Glenda's funding, that Mark LaBelle's doing on network analysis, and a grant that we have from the Global Food Initiative from the President's Office, we're applying this kind of formal quantitative network analysis to sustainable food systems in California. So I'm thinking we're connected. Are there any of the fellows of the Global Food Initiative here? I met some. Yeah, you're here. So I'm hoping some of you are actually linked in with this. You seem to be recognizing what I'm talking about. Are you working with Bev Ransom and Mariah Cawley on? Okay, at least you've heard of it. There's somebody here, and CAFÉ should show up in this system. So this was very qualitative, but we are actually going to be able to be much more analytical about how the social network of sustainable food system innovation works. That's going to be great for me. I think it's going to help you, Glenda. It's also going to help us to see how the system works, rather than just all this Davis versus Berkeley versus Santa Cruz versus Riverside, which is so boring and pointless. Now, legitimacy. You think this is complicated, so this is just to be useful. This is the legitimacy part. So you've got to have the users, the people who are going to use the information, but then you've got to have the people who feel they have a stake in the food system. They don't all agree. So this is where the wicked problem part comes. So this is actually, one of the first things I did was to get a couple of graduate students, and they went through, there have been a gazillion strategic plans for food system sustainability in California. I mean, literally 2 shelves. And I said, please go through, write down every group that was ever contacted about sustainability of food systems. And so that's all of this stuff out here, okay? And they're kind of, I'm a lumper by nature, so they're kind of lumped. If anybody ever says, and I've said this, that they've consulted all the stakeholders, don't believe them. Don't believe them. What you got to do, because you'll never do it, what you've got to do is to think strategically about who's got to be consulted and do the gut check. If you think, gosh, Norm's such a difficult guy. He's the last guy I want in a meeting because he's such an obstructionist. and he just mouthpieces the industry views. You better have Norm there. Because if you don't involve him, he's going to torpedo it sooner or later. So if you feel that kind of twinge, you know what I'm talking about. You got to think about the way to engage those people, not to co-opt them. So here's the upside pitch for that. This isn't about least common denominator, right? This is about uncommon kinds of collaborations where the stuff that nobody could think of by themselves comes out of, my newest catchphrase is creative abrasion, which was the theme for our board meeting this year. And completely on cue, our undergraduate staged a demonstration at my board meeting. So I was totally creatively abraded. Glenda no doubt remembers that. It's not always fun. If you set up the respectful setting, you can get through that and get onto a better place. That's, by the way, I'm an optimist. Okay, that wasn't a forecast, but I think that's the kind of mindset you need to have to even try to do something like this. And bless you for trying to do it. I'm going to just go through some images. I mentioned the education part. I'm going to talk less about our linking knowledge with action and extension, because I think in many ways that's obvious. But education and experiential learning have been such an important part of building our programs and the kinds of things that our undergraduates and graduate students do, which is explicitly about science and real stuff. We're so lucky to be working on food and agriculture because our science involves stuff you can touch, taste, feel, eat. So these are some of the heartwarming pictures from our student farm. I wish I could charge the chancellor for every time she uses the pictures. We also get them, actually do it. They weld, they drive tractors, they love it. These are kids from San Diego, San Francisco, LA. They're not farm kids like me. We approach education from a learning outcomes, not a facts. I mean, there's plenty of facts and skills. Come on, most of the stuff we're teaching is facts. 10 years from now, are we going to believe it? Seriously. But these capabilities, systems thinking, experimentation, inquiry, go through the whole list. Systems thinking is the number one thing. And I think that's actually what is the draw for many of our students. Systems thinking and also the civic engagement. Our students want to change the world. They want to change these systems. Okay. So this is what we did for the undergraduates. And then the graduate students said, gee, we want to have these skills too. And then the postdocs started saying, gee, we want to have these skills too. And I remember the faculty meeting where my faculty colleagues and I sat and was like, you know, we could stand for some work on some of these things too. So you get this complete inversion of the learning process, right? Everybody's learning. I think that's why the undergraduate major has been so successful. Our faculty colleagues love this stuff because it's new. They're getting real value out of it. So, in case you're wondering what systems thinking is, complex systems, integrating social, environmental, and economic perspectives. So 3 pillars of sustainability, got sustainability written all over it. And it's also about not getting paralyzed by complexity, right? You can't say that everything depends on everything. And the idea that a butterfly in the Amazon knocks over a skyscraper in Helsinki is baloney. The world can't be wired that way. But there are some really key connections that we got to pay attention to, and some of them are novel. So give me the short list of what those key cause and effect relationships are, and you only use one double-headed arrow in your diagram. Now, Friends at Arizona State University have been pulling together, not just for food and agriculture, but sustainability science more generally. So what are the capabilities? Lo and behold, you come from the energy sector, from education, from health, there's a common set of capabilities that are starting to emerge in the last 10 years. So Arnhem Wyke at ASU, by the way, I'm so glad I'm not the director of Sustainable Phoenix. Can you imagine a more discouraging task? It's Sustainable Las Vegas, I guess. But anyway, he put this together. So notice it starts with systems thinking, anticipatory. You got to have the forward-looking part. This is where actually I think we're weak in our curriculum, right? How do you envision the future? My field, economics, normative competency. We even have Latin for stay away from this. De gustibus non disputandum. It's don't question tastes. Well, this is actually requiring us to question tastes. Strategic is linking knowledge with action, and then there's all the communication, teamwork, leadership. I think we're pretty good on this. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. I think we've learned a lot. Here, this is a lot of the leadership stuff that our students love. This is not just forecasting, it's also scenarios. It's a lot of the stuff you're going to be doing today, probably. Do we have a curriculum for being anticipatory? If we got one, please let me know. And then the normative competency. One of my proudest things is we're going to be recruiting for our animal science department an ethicist, a philosopher who does ethics of the food system. Why? Because the big problems in livestock production are not going to be solved just by beating people over the head with more facts. It's actually going to be about bringing some kind of rigor to these ethical values, crazy, messy, wicked debates in society. So having a philosopher who can talk to biologists, I feel like that's going to be a tremendous advantage for us. 5 more minutes? Oh, good. You're a very generous person. This is just a little bit, this is the pictures of the Russell Ranch. This is the only long-term research of its type, replicated plots, but also at this scale, for irrigated Mediterranean agriculture on the planet. So it's not a Yolo County research facility. It's not a Sacramento Valley research facility. It is a research facility for the whole state and Italy. I get to go to Italy to talk about this. That's a nice thing in this job. Australia, Chile, but the whole planet. Because this irrigated Mediterranean agriculture, I mean Israel, is probably one of the most fragile or vulnerable in the face of climate change. So that's what that looks like. Think of it as your facility. Again, with Glenda's leadership, it's a very exciting opportunity to kind of start networking some of our UC sites. Again, thinking of networks of sites rather than my site versus your site. We've, again, linking knowledge with action, the question we've used to frame the whole Russell Ranch research agenda, data, is how to increase sustainability and increase food production. So that's the sustainable intensification question. And in terms of measurements, land, water, energy, it goes on, but those 3 dimensions are actually how we frame the trials there. Now, I'm into my last couple of slides. I mentioned, and Ariel's already heard a lot about the nitrogen assessment that we're just finishing. I'm not going to get into the substance of it, but just a bit of the credibility, usefulness, legitimacy part of that framework. So how those big concepts might matter in terms of design and implementation of a research activity. So it started out with consultations with over 300 stakeholders across the state. A place where we need help from you guys. We're not as well networked south of the Tehachapi's as we should be. So one of the big economies of scope is actually in terms of stakeholder connectivity. So the kind of relationships that you manage and are going to be building here are assets for us as we think about the whole state. And likewise, our density of contacts in the Central Valley. Okay, so that's another dimension. It's another reason why I'm so happy to have CAFÉ down here. But so the questions that came out, there were over 100 questions that came out of this. And again, I told you I'm a lumper. We did some lumping. So it was, what are the big sources of nitrogen pollution? What practices are most effective in mitigating it? And what are the policy challenges? And part of the policy challenge was fear of regulation. So when we started out, actually the Packard Foundation gave us a pot of money to start this. And the thinking was, we're paying attention to carbon dioxide for climate change forcing. We pay a little attention to methane. Nitrous oxide, 300 times the global warming effect, molecule per molecule of carbon dioxide. Shouldn't we pay some attention to nitrous oxide? So they gave us $1.5 million to figure that out. It turns out, nah. Turns out the global warming forcing of the nitrogen cycle is 2 or 3%. But what's the problem? A quarter of the nitrogen atoms that we import to the system here end up in our groundwater, approximately. Nitrate contamination of our aquifers. Turned out that Thomas Harder and others were working on this too at the same time, and there was kind of a convergence to be able to do the accounting of where this stuff is coming from and what we might need to do. We didn't know when we started. We didn't know what the problem was, or whether it was all, or whether there was no. A lot of farmers said, no problem. We have a visiting scholar from Denmark, and he was talking about working on nitrogen in Denmark. And he said, the real problem is farmers don't see this as a problem. They don't see it as a problem. But from the point of view of our water resources, air quality, so credibility, usefulness, legitimacy. You should recognize those words by now. I hope you carry them with you. Is there enough solid scientific information? There's tons and tons of research on nitrogen from Riverside, from Berkeley, from Davis, from everywhere. A big amount of it is fertilizer response trials. If you're worried about not what goes into the crop, but what leaks into the environment, those are less than half the glass of what you need to know. So this is one example of why framing things from the stakeholders' perspective is, we've done all of these yield curves, but what actually regulates the 50 or 60% of that nitrogen that's leaking into the environment? What are the control points there? So yeah, there was a lot of great research, but surprisingly little of it spoke to the stakeholders' concerns. And that's where Ken Barenclaw's work on policy instruments was such a breakthrough, having somebody actually apply a rigorous scientific approach to that question. Usefulness, are there feasible options? How many of you know Chris Van Kessel? Plant scientists probably do. Chris came to the first meeting. He said, this is a dead end. We've got shelves and shelves of technologies. We've got the technology to solve all these things. The problem is there's no incentive. So we have now actually, after 7 years, documented Chris was right. There are shelves and shelves of technologies, and with Ken's help, we understand we haven't been asking the right questions about incentives. Those technologies cost farmers more money. They require more management attention, or they require information that's not readily available, or some combination of all those things. There's a reason why those things aren't flying off the shelves. And it's actually in the area of policy and institutions, but you've got to have the technologies too. Well, when we wrote the proposal to the Packard Foundation, we were going to do apps for farmers to manage nitrogen in their fields and dairy manure and stuff. We scrapped all that because we got so much pushback on the legitimacy and the fear of the threat of regulation, appropriately so. There was a rumor going around the valley that the Packard Foundation wanted to ban the use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer in California. Well, that was not the intention, but this is what you're up against. And just to illustrate that, so after the disappointment with Copenhagen, I did this little op-ed. I put it on the Huffington Post. The responses there were boring. Put it in the Sacramento Bee, and I got one of the most precious comments I've ever gotten. So this was posted. The great thing about the Bee website is people who post comments actually get to vote on their favorite comment. And so this was the favorite comment on my op-ed piece, and you can see it. I'm not making this up. So Tom here is the director of the UC Davis Agricultural Sustainability Institute. Like most of the man-caused global warming charlatans, he only gets to keep his cushy university job and millions in fat government grant money. Thank you, NSF. If he keeps the global warming hoax moving, it's the same old story when it comes to crooks follow the money. I use this slide every chance I can get. This illustrates every dimension of questions of legitimacy, right? I'm bought and paid for. I don't care about the facts. In fact, my interests conflict with the facts. So, take legitimacy seriously, but what do? I mean, I don't know who this person is. I really don't care. You can't worry about the tails of the distribution. But this is what we did. Transparency. Just let it all hang out there. Don't worry about you're going to make mistakes. Stuff's coming. We were wrong about nitrogen. Everybody was wrong about it. We had to be wrong about it to actually get the understanding of what needed to happen. Something we've gotten from IPCC in Millennium Ecosystem Assessment is it's not about precision, it's actually about uncertainty. And saying, for this particular key data point, denitrification of groundwater in the Tulare Basin. We have 3 observations. They're frighteningly consistent, so consistent they don't look independent. That is probably the single key data point for understanding what the problem is. By not pretending that's precise, but by saying, holy moly, we really need to understand denitrification in groundwater in the Tulare Basin, I think by facing up to uncertainty, we provide an important service. It's that gut check, making sure that those inconvenient folks like Norm actually are at the meetings. And we shifted from the quick, what we thought quick and easy, but probably useless decision support stuff to a more forward-looking thing. One of the great thing about sustainability in multiple generations, a great way to get people to step out of their narrow vested interest is to ask them, what kind of a world, what kind of a state would you like your grandchildren to live in? That's a great way to discover the common interest. And we spend a lot of time on the road. And that's kind of a cyclical thing. We go through patterns of being very introverted, writing the book, but also going out and having a series of meetings around. And thanks to ANR's new initiatives in public policy and also government relations at Davis, we're actually getting, I think, a little more savvy about engaging legislators in an appropriate way, too. So I'm going to stop. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody disagreed. Are they as crazy as we are?
Could be.
Yeah. Here, you should.
I just wanted to first, let's thank Tom for what I thought was an inspiring talk. How many people think that we are crazy? Okay, that's a good sign.
If you've got half on your side, that's all you need.
All right.
Okay,
that's great. We have a few minutes before the break if there are any questions for Tom. Okay, why don't you ask the question? I'll repeat it and give the thing to Tom.
Maybe this is a somewhat trivial framework question, but I'm curious how you initiate members of the UC Davis community across colleges, because your institute is specifically in the College of Ag, and one of the things that we're trying to do here is engage non-professional engineering, people from our humanities, I'm curious what you've done at Davis that's worked or not worked in trying to really make these relationships legitimate, both in terms of funding and minimizing barriers for real innovative.
So the question is, how do you work across colleges when you have a college-based institute?
So maybe this should be deleted from the video. The main advantage of having a well, it's actually not a college-based institute purely because it's also an A&R-based. By being college-based and A&R-based, I'm actually able to fly a little bit below the worst bureaucratic requirements of campus level, frankly. So we have the freedom particularly on design of our processes. Engineering has actually been one of the easier ones for us to connect to, because one department in our College of Engineering is actually also a department in our College of Ag. So I'm really big on ambiguity. I love the things where there are these little crossover things, and that's how you work around. We've been slowest on humanities, and that's where how Davis classifies philosophy is a completely bizarre thing. But building bridges into the arts and humanities is the place that I think that's going to be the longest part of it. But it's happening. One of the things I wanted to say is be kind to yourselves in doing this. Start out with a big vision, but do the easy stuff first. So for me, the easy stuff was the integration within our college. I mean, I'm contractually required to say this. We are the #1 college of agriculture on the planet. So agriculture and environmental. So, I mean, I can take refuge in that. Yeah. I'm leaving town. But so I can take refuge in, like, if we can get all the cylinders firing for this, that's a good thing. And other people are piling in. School of Education came in early. Graduate School of Management. I think, though, more of individual people rather than the bureaucratic structures. I mean, you won't find my institute in the organogram very clearly. It's people, personal relationships, getting to go to know Norm, things like that. You're not satisfied with my answer, I can tell.
I'm thinking about, like, your undergraduate degree is only done in your college. It's not.
No, that's not true. So we have, I'm also contractually required to say, at UC Davis, we have this unique graduate group structure. So ecology is actually a multi-college degree. So I've advised students in engineering. We have students from biological sciences. There's a reason why these structural rigidities exist, and they're part of actually replication and quality control. I mean, they are what got us to be where we are. But it's just about finding those little links so that we can do this slice of special stuff. Okay. We're 9 years into this now at ASI. In 2014, in July, there was a moment where I could feel the shift. It was like the pieces were in place. My job suddenly got easier and a lot more fun. But that was January 2007 to July 2014. That's why I'm saying be kind to yourself and produce results. As long as you're producing results, Dean's going to love it. Vice President's going to, you love results, right? Yeah, she loves results. There you go. Keep Glenda happy, you'll do just fine. And I'm kidding, Glenda, but don't get this tension between process and product. You can't duck the tension. You got to focus on getting the process right, but also having a stream of products. Okay. There are more hands.
Okay. They've got a. Why don't you give them the microphone? Then that'll be taped too, right? We'll still repeat
It's probably good practice.
Okay, good.
Okay, excellent talk. I really appreciated it. I was interested, you said you've had success in your new undergraduate Sustainable Ag and Food Systems major. Could you give us a couple of metrics in terms of, enrollment and graduation rate, and then also maybe placement of undergrads? Where are they going? Because I think, to me, that's one of the maybe doable things off the bat that we could.
You better talk with me about that. But
Okay, so the question was, what are the what's some of the details of the nature of the new undergraduate major, and what are some of the productive statistics and how to do it? And it sounds like it's really easy, with which I am contractually obligated to say sounds like a hell of a lot of work to me.
It is a hell of a lot of work. When we went to the academic senate to say we got this new major we'd like approved, I think nobody'd gotten a new major in the University of California since like English and chemistry became. I mean, nobody knew how to do it. I'm serious. So metrics, 2011, 2 students. Today, more than 100. Keeps going this way, we're all going to be sustainable agriculture and food systems majors soon. I mean, it seems like it's going to be somewhere between 100 and 200 at a kind of a steady state, which is a medium-sized major for today. It's not 800, but it's not 20. Biggest surprise, transfer students do really well in this thing. It was actually designed with this idea in mind of like, oh, this 4-year integrated curriculum. But because it's kind of a mashup between a more liberal arts approach, so basics, everything from philosophy to chemistry and physics, it turns out that people can get a lot of that stuff at community college and transfer in really effectively. Do they finish in 2 years always after they transfer? No. But it looks like 2 to 3 years. Some of them are doing it less than 2 years. The ones who come in as freshmen, it's kind of the typical 4 or 5 years. So we're getting people through. It's actually an extremely structured major. It's not loosey-goosey. And so their biggest challenge is actually getting into the courses they need. I mean, it's our common problem. In terms of placement, the biggest myth is we're training 100 organic farmers. Some of them want to be farmers. Some of them want to be organic farmers. But it's kind of like the population as a whole. That's a small minority. Most of them are actually going into NGOs, so various kinds of civil society. But there is a significant number who are really interested in the private sector. And I think that the sustainability science jobs in the private sector is going to be a big growth area. I mean, we hear that from food companies. They're required to do a capstone course with me, which is a real client and a real problem. And when we started out, the very first graduate, her capstone course project was, she made a presentation to the senior management of Mars Incorporated, the 3rd largest food company on the planet. So we had one of our seniors doing that. There's a nice complementarity between the institute and the major. I should say the major lives, for all of us academic senate members, the major is supervised and housed by departments. Happens to be 9 departments, but it's within that structure. My institute just provides support. We do fundraising for the extra bells and whistles to make it work. So I give you at least 3 factoids. Fast growth, I get that question all the time. If we build something like this, will anybody come? We had people show up from Indonesia and China saying, I heard about your major. When I was 16, it became my life's goal to come here. I'm thinking, my gosh, we have to deliver for these people. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
I think we should probably
Oh.
cut the...
I talked to she wants to say something.
Okay. Okay, so Chicago has an excellent question that we're going to entertain before the break. A comment. Yes.
Okay. And I won't say anything.
I was just going to say that I'm contractually obligated to say that a new sustainability studies, an interdisciplinary major, has been approved at UCR starting this fall. And students are taking lower level courses in science so that they have some exposure to sustainability related science. And the rest of the courses are mainly in CHAS, the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. But it's located in the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies. And the main focus of the program is social justice.
I love this. So this is an opportunity to explore in the afternoon.
I'd love to, but I can't.
So, Chicago, I would like to charge you with sending a document to the CAFÉ mailing list about the new program so that we can disseminate this information thoroughly.
Okay, we are going to have to stop, unfortunately, at this point. I'm contractually obligated to tell you that. Yes. But what a great talk, and I think, yes.
Thanks, everybody. It's an honor to be here, and more power to you.